Good morning, aspirants. It's 30th of October today, and I welcome you all on today's edition of What to Read in the Hindu newspaper. While going through the articles, we will not only see its relevance with regard to prelims and mains, but we'll also try and interlink it with other GS papers as well. I am sure to align your newspaper reading as a part of our GS syllabus. So let's get started. The very first article that is there in the paper and that catches our attention is about uneven growth in industrial output. So increasing incomes and creating jobs are must to boost demand. Now, when we map this particular article in our syllabus, this will fall under GS paper 3 under the theme Indian economy, growth, development and employment. The key theme that has been discussed in this particular article primarily talks about the index of industrial production. Data reveals slowest half-yearly industrial growth in 5 years, only 3%. It is highlighting uneven sectoral growth. That is, manufacturing shows recovery, but labor-intensive sectors, they shows lag. From prelims perspective, the arenas that we have to read and revise is about knowing about index of industrial production, its base year, components such as mining, manufacturing, and electricity. What is the difference between core industries versus IIP distinction, concepts with regard to base effects and labor-intensive industries. For mains perspective, we need to know about structural bottlenecks in industrial growth, implications for job creation, income stagnation, and consumption slowdown, policy measures for boosting broad-based manufacturing growth. So in this manner, this particular article is to be seen. Not only the core data, but also the peripheral areas that could be a potential question from our prelims perspective. We need to brush up our knowledge on. The next important articles that is there in the paper and that catches our attention is about an amended constitution bill, its contentious issues. While mapping this in our syllabus will fall under GS paper 2 polity, separation of powers and constitutional morality are the themes. So the bill, the key theme that is being discussed in this particular article talks about this bill mandates automatic removal of ministers detained for 30 days or more. It raises concerns of misuse of arrest power and the threat to federal balance. For prelims perspective, the arenas that we have to understand is about knowing Article 75, 164 and 239 AA, Council of Ministers provisions. The key judgments that has been talked in this particular article is about Joginder Kumar case of 1994, Arnesh Kumar case of 2014, and Satyendra Kumar until of 2022. We need to know about what is the difference between Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita versus CRPC provisions on arrest and bail. For mains perspective, the same article is to be seen through the lens of balance between integrity in public office versus protection from political misuse, constitutional morality and presumption of innocence till found guilty, need for institutional safeguards against arbitrary arrest. So this is how this particular article is to be read and revised from today's paper. The next important article that is there in the paper and is relevant for our exam is about federalism and funds, relevant for GS paper 2, center-state relations, and also cooperative federalism. The key theme that has been discussed in this particular article is about Kerala's temporary freeze on joining PM Shri exposes center-state tussle over education policy and fund allocation linked to NEP 2020. For prelims perspective, we need to know about what is PM Shri Yojana, Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan, new education policy and its provision with regard to 3-language formula of 2022, which is a tussle between center and state. Constitutional entries, education in concurrent list is supposed to be. Role of MOU and fiscal federalism concept. For mains perspective, the same article is to be seen through the lens of fiscal coercion versus cooperative federalism, judicial role in protecting state autonomy, federal implication of centrally sponsored schemes. This is how this particular article is to be holistically read and revised. The next important article that is there in the paper and that catches our attention is about a decade after Paris Accord, an unstoppable transition. relevant for GS paper 3, environment and climate change. The theme that has been discussed in this particular article talks about, after a decade of COP21, Paris Climate Agreement has reduced projected warming trajectory, but emission reduction remains insufficient. It highlights the success and calls for renewed ambition before COP30. For prelims perspective, we need to know Paris Agreement goals, CBDR, Common but Differentiated Responsibility Principle, ISA, International Solar Alliance, founding members, its objective. Also knowing about COP30 meeting. For mains perspective, the arenas that we have to unfold upon is evaluating Paris Agreement's effectiveness as of now, India's leadership in renewable energy transition, need for climate finance and loss and damage fund, and what is just transition. So all these things we have to revise while going through this particular article. Not only the core, but also focusing upon peripheral areas as well. The next important article that is there in the paper and that catches our attention is about Norway and India Green Maritime Partners. Relevant for GS paper 2, international relations, and also GS paper 3, environment and infrastructure. The key theme that has been discussed in this particular article talks about India-Norway deepening maritime collaboration through green shipping, blue economy, and women empowerment in maritime workforce. From prelims perspective, we need to know about India EFTA, TIPA, India-Norway Task Force on Blue Economy, Maritime India Vision of 2030, IMO's vision of net zero framework, 𝗗𝗏𝗶𝗆 world's first autonomous zero emission ship, knowing about it. For mains perspective, the same article is to be seen through the lens of India's maritime diplomacy and sustainable ocean strategy, role of blue economy in 𝗗𝗏𝗃 vision of 2047, gender inclusion in maritime professions. So in this manner, this particular article is to be holistically read and revised. The next important article that is there in the paper and that catches our attention is about what is China's complaint against India at WTO, relevant for GS paper 2 IR, GS paper 3 WTO and economy. The theme that has been discussed in this particular article is about China challenges India's PLI scheme at WTO, alleging violation of TRIMS agreement and SCM agreement through domestic value addition clauses. For prelims perspective, we need to know about WTO as a body, what is SCM, what is TRIMS and national treatment principle, PLI schemes and its features and DVA concept, WTO dispute settlement mechanisms. For mains perspective, we need to know about balancing domestic industrial policy with global trade rules, strategic autonomy versus WTO compliance, India's stand amid absence of appellate body in WTO. This is how this particular article is to be holistically read and revised. The last important article for the day is about how do cyclones form and how are they measured. Relevant for GS paper 1 geography and GS paper 3 disaster management. The theme that has been discussed in this particular article talks about cyclones are heat engines powered by warm tropical water. Formation needs low pressure, high wind velocity and Coriolis force effect. For prelims perspective, the arena that we have to brush up our knowledge is on conditions favorable for tropical cyclone formation, difference between cyclone, hurricane and typhoon, role of Coriolis force and wind shear. For mains perspective, the arenas that we have to revise is about linkage of climate change with increasing cyclone intensity, India's preparedness via IMD, NDMA and resilient infrastructure, early warning system and coastal adaptation measures, mitigation measures, effective case studies with regard to it when coping up the impact of cyclone in eastern and western coast. So this is all from my end for today's Hindu newspaper analysis. Till we meet for the next time, take care and Goodbye.